Welcome to the Geopolitics Snapshot. This time we are talking about Ukraine, whose parliament passed a controversial new law in August 2024 that will ultimately enable Ukrainian authorities to disband the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is one of the two competing Orthodox churches in the country. It is also sometimes referred to as the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate due to its long historic affiliation with the Russian-Orthodox Church. According to the Ukrainian government, the new law is a necessary step to achieve independence in Ukrainian spiritual matters. It has, however, been criticized as a severe violation of religious freedoms by various organizations, including the Vatican. And in the public discourse online, there seems to be a lot of confusion about what is actually happening. Is Ukraine banning Orthodox Christianity, or is it banning a church that is tied to the Russian-Orthodox Church? Well, the situation is way more complicated than that, which is why I decided to make this video. To start, we first need a bit of context on how the Orthodox Church is organized. It's best to think about it as a community of various churches. There is a Bulgarian Orthodox Church, a Serbian Orthodox Church, a Greek Orthodox Church, and many more. But these churches still consider themselves to be a single, canonical church. Aside from these canonical churches, there are also a number of unrecognized Orthodox churches, which either split from one of the canonical churches or formed independently without permission. For all of you Marvel fans out there, think of these churches as a confirmed franchise canon, while these ones are the ambitious fanfictions trying to become part of the canon. Now in Ukraine we have a special and complicated situation, as we have two Orthodox churches that both claim to be the legitimate church of Ukraine. For one, we have the target of the new law, the aforementioned Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is a recognized canonical church. In its current form, it has existed since 1992 after the Russian Orthodox Church granted it a degree of self-rule. However, the church claims to be the direct successor of the medieval Orthodox Church of Kiev that was de facto incorporated into the Russian Orthodox Church when Russia expanded into modern-day Ukraine. This church remained tied to the Russian Orthodox Church until May 2022, when it declared independence over the Russian invasion and the Russian Church's overt support for it. Today, it's estimated that only between 4 to 20% of Ukrainians are still members of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, concentrated in the east of the country. However, before the start of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the majority of Ukrainian Orthodox Christians were actually members of this church, which is why I will refer to it as the quote-unquote old church for more clarity. Additionally, we also have the not at all confusingly named Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is a different church that borders the line between canonical and unrecognized church. It was formed in 2018 through the efforts by the Patriarch of Constantinople out of two previously unrecognized Orthodox churches that formed in the late 80s and early 90s. However, most other canonical Orthodox churches have not yet recognized it. It too claims to be the rightful successor of Ukraine's medieval church. If you are wondering why the Patriarch of Constantinople is involved, there is basically a centuries-long dispute between Constantinople and Moscow about who has or had ultimate authority over the Church of Ukraine. I actually made a video about this a while ago. Today, between 35 to 55% of Orthodox Ukrainians consider themselves to be part of this quote-unquote young church. It is also heavily favored by the Ukrainian state, since historically it had no connection to the Russian Orthodox Church. But wait a second, didn't I mention before that the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church also cut ties with Moscow in 2022? Well, it did, kind of. A few months after the Russian invasion began, the old church published a declaration in which it proclaimed to be independent from Moscow due to its support of the invasion. It officially ended any Russian involvement in its administrative and religious matters and also removed any mention of the Russian Orthodox Church and its leader from the liturgy. Funnily enough, this declaration was not very well received by both sides of the conflict. In Russia, it was flat out rejected and dismissed by the Patriarch of Moscow, and in Ukraine, the government and a large segment of the population have remained extremely skeptical about the sincerity of this move. The old Ukrainian Orthodox Church has a track record of being very hesitant to criticize Russia or distance itself from the Russian church leadership before 2022. And it also has been critical about Ukraine's integration into Western political structures such as the European Union, all of which contributed to the church becoming a controversial topic in Ukrainian media. So in the last decade, the old church experienced a decline as members started to leave, often joining the young church instead, not because of religious differences between the Ukrainian churches, but because church affiliation had become a matter of national identity. The wording of the declaration was also heavily criticized for using the secular words independence and autonomy instead of autocephaly, which is a specific church term referring to church independence. Opponents of the church see this as an indication that the declaration was not genuine. Defenders, however, have pointed out that according to church rules, autocephaly can only be officially used when granted by a higher church authority under specific circumstances, which is possibly why the term was avoided, as it was crafted in a very quick way. But these aren't the only reasons for why the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church has now become the target of the new law. Despite the declaration, the church is seen to have done too little too late to, for example, deal with members of its clergy that have shown sympathy or even support towards the Russian invasion, and some clergy members in the Russian-occupied southeast have been found to openly collaborate with Russian authorities with little to no consequences. Now, this does not mean that all of the old church's clergy and members are pro-Russian. Many priests and members have expressed that they do support Ukraine in this conflict and that their communities and churches are suffering heavily through the Russian invasion. But there are also those that support Russia, as demonstrated by multiple prisoner exchanges with priests of the church. Regardless of this complicated situation, the old church's long ambiguity in this conflict and the historic affiliation with the Moscow Patriarchate have contributed to it being perceived as a tool of the Russian church and state in the public eye, and so the Ukrainian government seeks to minimize the presence of the old church through the new law and hopes to bolster the young Orthodox Church of Ukraine instead. But what does the law really say? In short, it allows Ukrainian authorities to ban any religious organization that is affiliated with an armed aggressor country, so in other words, Russia. Now, the wording of the law is intentionally vague to allow Ukrainian authorities maximal flexibility in taking action against Russian influences. However, it is also the reason why the law has been heavily criticized by international religious organizations and even members of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The fear is that the law will do more harm than good for several reasons. Firstly, the law will put any members of the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church under the suspicion of harboring pro-Russian beliefs. It will also increase pressure on them to join the younger Orthodox Church of Ukraine instead, which is seen by critics as problematic. In Orthodox Christianity, tradition and church continuity are extremely important, which is why many believers that are still members of the church are unwilling to join the younger church with its heavily disputed status. Secondly, the law can not only target the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but any religious organization that Ukrainian authorities determine to be affiliated with Russia. This could, at some point, be exploited to suppress or threaten any unwanted presence of a religion in the country. There is also the question of how exactly the authorities will determine if an organization is affiliated with Russia. There are concerns that Ukrainian authorities will only need minimal evidence to enforce a ban. And thirdly, the law will likely harbor problems for Ukraine's EU accession process. Guaranteeing religious freedom is an important criteria that needs to be fulfilled to successfully join the European Union, and at the moment the new law is so broad that Ukraine will likely have to repeal or at least modify it to fulfill this criteria. But from the Ukrainian government's perspective, this is a problem for another time, as chances for a prompt EU accession are extremely low anyways. Despite these criticisms, the law has been passed by a clear majority of the Ukrainian parliament and also seems to enjoy the support of the majority of Ukrainians, but it will not go into effect immediately. First, there is a transitional period during which all religious organizations in Ukraine are, at least in theory, given the chance to sever any remaining ties to Russia. Whether the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church will be able to convince the Ukrainian authorities that it has done so is, however, doubtful. The big question is now, what will happen once the law goes into full effect? Well, the law will not immediately ban the old church entirely, since in Ukraine each parish is registered as its own organization, of which there are still thousands. Therefore, it's likely that Ukrainian authorities will begin to disband parishes of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church step by step, until it basically ceases to function. How long this process will take is difficult to say. It will likely include the seizure of churches and monasteries that eventually will be transferred to the younger Orthodox Church of Ukraine. This will in all likelihood include Ukraine's holiest Orthodox site, the Lavra Monastery, which is still controlled by the old church, and they will not be kicked out without numerous arrests, as past confrontations with the government have shown. However, there is a small possibility that this could be avoided. The old Ukrainian Orthodox Church has entered into a dialogue with the Patriarch of Constantinople in hopes to find a solution that will satisfy the Ukrainian government and avoid a ban. If successful, it could possibly lead to the reconciliation of the older and younger church in order to perhaps merge them at some point in the future. However, both of these churches have been feuding with each other for years and in some cases even decades, and Ukrainian authorities also seem not be very interested in waiting for such a compromise, which could take years or even decades. As you can see, the religious situation in Ukraine is incredibly complicated, since we are dealing with multiple conflicts that are all occurring at the same time between Ukraine and Russia, between the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the young Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and between the Patriarchates of Constantinople and Moscow. Whatever happens, one thing seems to be clear: the new law and the events that will follow it are going to have a significant impact on Ukrainian society and Orthodoxy as a whole. I hope this helped you understand the issue a little bit better, and if you are interested in the conflict between the Patriarchates of Constantinople and Moscow over Ukraine, check out this video I made here. Just keep in mind that this was made before the start of the invasion. That's it for this time's Geopolitics Snapshot. Thank you for watching, and a big thank you to my patrons and channel members. Until next time.